Ryan, guess what's happening on Monday?
My guess is Guy Fawkes Day.
No, Guy
No,
Fawkes, i.e. me. Well, I hope it's not me because I would have been hung, drawn, and quartered.
that's
You know,
true. We're still hoping, Colin. Like there's still a chance.
it's Halloween on Monday, so welcome Halloween, everybody.
Yes,
Um,
and for those of you watching us on video, that's the primary scare tactic that we bring is that you get to see us. And those of you
yeah.
who are listening to us in audio only, that was Colin trying to speak through a mask.
Yes. For those who are listening on audio, well, I had a mask on, one of those Guy Fawkes masks. Um,
Yeah, it's
I
we're
don't know.
just we're
Can you
moving
tell I've
strictly to visual gags. Sorry, those of you who are listening on audio. It's all going to be visual gags from now on.
can listen, mate? Can you tell I've taken the mask off now?
No. Yes, you don't have a jaunty mustache anymore. That was a good look.
Yeah, classic. Anyway, yeah. So
Wait,
Halloween
we
on
we need to
Monday.
stop and talk about why you have the mask of a terrorist just next to your desk all the time. Like this is
You know what the
just in
sad
case.
thing is? The sad thing is that it shows my dedication to a joke. And knowing that we were recording this, I actually went out and bought it.
Well, now we need to talk about why that was your go-to choice for a
Well,
Halloween
it
costume.
was an interesting decision actually because I then started to think, I'm not sure what type of mask I should get, and I didn't want to get anything too scary because I
See, this
didn't
is
want to
this is what
scare
we
our
need to dig
audience.
into, Colin. Like, forget it. Whatever you thought you were tuning into today, listener. We're gonna dig into Colin's psychology around costume choice. I think that there's a
And the
lot.
other interesting thing is, I got two choices. I got a yellowish one and a whitish one. So I wasn't sure which one to use. There you go.
Now you and your wife can have matching Halloween costumes.
You
Then
never know. Yes. I'll tell. Are you now going to tell Lorraine that you think that should wear a mask? That's
yes,
very nice.
yeah. Nice
So
try. Nice try. Lorraine loves me. You're the one
she
who's going to
does.
be in trouble.
So we're talking about fear today, okay?
Yes,
And we're talking about fear as a use as a marketing tool. And obviously, Halloween coming up on Monday gave us an excellent excuse just to wear masks,
that's right.
particularly as we're now starting to do some of these podcasts using video as well. Yeah, fear as a marketing tool. Maybe Ryan, you hit us with an example of how fear is used in marketing, and then maybe I'll share one.
Sure. Yeah, there are lots, right? So they're pretty common in like public health messaging. So you'll see a
Yeah,
lot of like anti-smoking campaigns, for example, that
yeah.
rely on fear. In a lot of countries, they'll have graphic photographs of, lungs that have
They
been
do in
blackened.
England. They have pictures of people's lungs, black
Yeah.
lungs, and it's awful. It looks awful, I have to
And
say.
I mean, that's a fear appeal. Like they're trying to scare you
Sure,
around like what'll happen to you if you keep smoking. So what the hell,
sure,
you'll stop.
sure. Yeah.
Um,
And another example is politicians, and
yes.
I think there was a famous one in the 1960s, wasn't there, of a nuclear bomb exploding, and if you vote for this person, then they're going to cause a nuclear war and various different things like that.
Well, I'm glad
Uh,
that person didn't win.
yeah,
But,
no,
yeah,
absolutely. But yeah, no, I mean, a lot of the negative, very negative um, political adverts are based around fear. So let's start at the top level and again start with the theory.
sure.
What's the theory behind fear? Why is fear so motivational?
Well, I mean, one of your hobby horses, one of the things you really love to talk about is the importance of emotion and customer experience. Fear is an emotion, and it is a really powerful one. It's really basic and very powerful. So the reason that marketers sometimes use fear appeals is because it's so powerful. We can tap into something very, very primal
Yeah,
in responding, activating, and responding to fear. So in terms of why it works, when it works, part of it is motivation. So if you've ever tried to communicate to customers or potential customers, you know that getting people to care is often a really high hurdle. It's hard. Like, we care about this thing a lot because we're selling it.
Yeah.
But most people don't care about what we're selling. And so
Sure.
one of the reasons that fear appeals works is that fear can be very motivational. So we can get
Right.
people to care if we can get them to be afraid.
Yeah. And it just reminds me actually of I don't know if I've ever told you this. We went to Universal Studios one year Halloween, and they do these I don't know what they call them. Rooms, big tents where you go in and they
Oh, like a
people
kind of a
jump in.
haunted house kind
Yeah,
of.
a haunted
Yeah.
house, but this was
Or because
Universal
it's
Studios.
Florida, it's a haunted tent.
Yeah, well, not tent, but sort of I don't know how to describe them, but they're obviously not there for the whole of the year, but they put them up,
Right,
and
right, right,
we'd gone to Disney and they had the Boo Fest,
right.
so you can imagine it was all very family orientated. You go to the Universal Studios, and they had people chasing people down the road with chainsaws and stuff like that, and jumping out of you, and it was some of it was surprising or
Yeah.
shocking or whatever. But the interesting thing is that my Lorraine, my wife, and my eldest daughter were going into these things, and they were petrified, absolutely petrified. Every time they went round a corner and somebody would jump out of them or whatever. And I was trying to go logically. Universal Studios doesn't want to kill me.
Right.
Okay, this
Not
person
yet.
with a chain, no, this person with a chainsaw, no, they hadn't got all my money yet, so that's why they
Well, that's
didn't
why.
make them.
Right. Yeah.
But it's now become a bit of a family joke because it's just one of those things that you sort of continually talk about. But it did make me think at the time. It's such a powerful emotion, isn't it?
Yeah.
But as I started to think about this, and I started to look into this, and this it made me then start to think about sort of the juncture between fear and loss aversion.
Yeah.
So, can you talk a bit about that? Because maybe tell
Sure.
people, just to remind people what loss aversion is. But it feels like with everything in life, there are degrees of this, I guess.
Yeah.
And the point I was making about Universal Studios is, again, going back to our favorite subject, I guess there's segmentation involved. Something will make somebody really scared and motivate them to do something. Somebody, it will be less so.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the loss aversion, really quick. So loss aversion is just the very simple idea that people tend to feel losses more profoundly than they do gains. Losses
Yeah,
loom larger. We get a stronger emotional reaction. Losses are more motivational. And I'm glad you brought this up because there's clearly an overlap between loss aversion and fear, but it's just an overlap. So loss aversion can exist outside of fear appeals, and fear can exist outside of loss, I think. I would have to think about that more deeply. But I
right.
think that it's not useful to think of these as the same thing, but more useful to think of them as existing in kind of an overlap. So certain types of loss are fear based. So we talk about like fear of missing out, right?
Yeah,
And that is obviously a loss aversion phenomenon. Like we don't want this stuff. Now I also don't think it's generally kind of a profound and emotion, like really strong emotional
sure.
fear.
And it's not
Um,
FOMO, fear of missing out, is not really fear, is it? I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
I
it
wouldn't
can be
class
like
that as
social
fear.
isolation and things like if we
Yeah,
feel like we're not, getting these experiences that other people are getting, and therefore we're going to be left out and left behind. Like, I think that there
yeah,
can be fear about that. I
right,
agree, though, it tends to be less visceral than if you vote for this other guy, we're all going to die in a nuclear war. Like that
sure,
seems qualitatively different.
sure,
So,
sure. And loss aversion, correct me if I'm wrong again. I mean, the one I always think of is we subscribed to a service and they basically said, if you don't subscribe to this service, you're going to lose all the data that you've collected in there,
yep.
or, the price is going to go up 20% more next time you try and do it. So you feel that there's some form of loss, but that's different to fear. Whereas I was going, well, fear means I'm losing my life or I'm something catastrophic is going to happen to me.
I mean, again, if we're talking about on a spectrum, like that would be
Yeah,
one end of the spectrum. Like if I can get you to fear for your life, that is going to be a very strong fear appeal. But I think
sure.
there are examples of fear appeal. So like anti-smoking ads are around that, right? Like you
Yeah,
could lose your life. You will die if you keep smoking. I
yeah,
think though that there are less extreme versions of that that would still fall under a fear appeal. So I teach a case in my MBA classes about Tylenol, the launch of Tylenol,
right.
which is acetaminophen painkiller. I assume it's a global brand.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, we don't really get it in England. We would
Paracetaminofen.
call it paracetamol
Yeah.
in England. Yeah,
So in the US, it's branded. It's an acetaminophen product. And the positioning of Tylenol when it was launched back in the 1970s was that it's safer for your stomach than aspirin. Aspirin can cause stomach problems in something like
sure,
1% of the population. Well, Tylenol launched on this fear appeal. Like, how do you know that you have stomach problems when you take aspirin? You take aspirin and it causes you stomach problems.
sure,
Well, we can save you from that. Like, you don't need to be afraid of that. You don't need to be worried about
sure,
stomach problems. You can take this product instead.
sure,
And so that's still in the same spectrum of fear, but it's not going to kill you. I don't think anybody's ever died from having an upset stomach after taking aspirin, but it is
sure,
uncomfortable. It's something that we want to avoid, something that's painful. So we're
sure.
gonna save you from that with this appeal.
Well, so where would you put farmer ads now that you see? Because I was thinking about them, and there's part of me thinking, um, well, they're not really trying to make me scared. But the other interesting part with pharmaceutical ads is they obviously, because of compliance, they have to list out the 50 million things that could happen to you. You may grow four heads. You
Right.
may, we may come and take your children away from you, or whatever it may be. And you think to yourself, and I was thinking about it the other day. I'm not even really listening to that. You know,
Yeah.
um, but would you say they're based around fear now or not?
I mean, I think that most medicines are not in the way they're positioned, but I'm sure that some are. I'm sure we could find examples
Sure.
of both over the counter and prescription medicines where the appeal is still fear based, and I assume it would be the fear of like this is what will happen if you don't take this.
Yeah, I was going to say, or is it more subtle now?
I mean, again, there are
Is
lots
it
of
more
medicines that are
implied?
not positioned around a fear appeal, right? Where it's like,
Yeah,
this is the benefit that'll accrue to you if you do take this, as opposed to this is the terrible thing that'll happen if you don't. And
yeah,
we can talk about why that might be.
yeah. So I'm thinking of some of the medicines that you see advertised where they would effectively start off with the problems of the disease,
Hmm.
i.e., if you are you suffering from this, or this, and do you want to get away from suffering from this, and this?
Yeah.
Therefore, take this drug and it will help you.
So I can, so previewing where this discussion is going to go towards the end of the episode, we're going to talk about some of the negative consequences of using fear appeals or some of the
Sure.
risks, I guess. And one of them is reactance or cognitive dissonance reduction. And the idea there is that if things are kind of too scary, then we might withdraw from that. So, like your example at Universal Studios, it could be that at some point, people are experiencing these fears, and so they have to deal with that in some way, and so they could just like deliberately decide like, okay, this is obviously fake, and so I'm not going to like get into this. I'm going to be too cool. I think a lot of
Sure.
men who go through haunted houses like have
Sure.
to protect their fragile masculinity by like deliberately not
Sure.
reacting to anything, and I think that that's
Yes.
a form of reactance where it's like
Yes.
I know you're trying to scare me and I'm not going to let you.
Yes.
And so I think if we're dealing with very serious diseases, we might already be in that camp. Like, so if you've got cancer, like I don't need a fear appeal. I'm already terrified.
Sure.
And so if you come at me with a fear appeal, then that might just push me over and I'm like, all right, that's wrong. But I can remember I've seen ads for like psoriasis, which is a skin condition that is not dangerous, but it is unsightly. And so a lot of people who have psoriasis are embarrassed by it and they fear social
Sure.
rejection. And so I have seen fear appeal ads for like skin conditions. So
Yeah.
like this medicine will reduce that skin condition so you can wear short sleeves again and you don't need to worry about
Sure.
like people staring at you. And I do think
Yes.
that's a fear appeal, right? It's
Yes.
farther away from the end of that spectrum.
It was making me think, and I'm going to put this in the show notes. Have you ever heard of a guy called Michael McIntyre?
No.
He's a British comedian, and I'll put. I'm sure I can find it. I'll hopefully put a clip in the show notes where he talks about um, bees or wasps, and he basically sort of says, "Are you a wafter?" You know, and it's. I'm probably going to kill this joke, but it's, you know, do you see a bee or a wasp and like run away at 3 million miles an hour screaming your head off,
Hmm.
or are you one of these cool people that sit there and go, the best thing to do is not to move.
Right.
I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to allow this to, go around me because that's the best thing to do. But inside, you're screaming your head off.
You're
Or are
still
you a sort
feeling
of,
the fear. Yes.
yeah, absolutely. But you're trying to control it, which is what you were talking about. You're trying to go, because that's what happened to me at university. Effectively, was going, no, I was scared then, but actually, I really don't think that not Walt Disney, Universal Studios are trying to kill me. So I'm going to be Mr. Cool here, and
That's
I'm
right.
just going to try to let the left side of my brain overcome this natural instinct to run away. And also, I was the man of the family, so I
That's
couldn't
right.
run away and let my wife and my daughter
That's why
suffer.
whenever Colin goes to one of these things now, he always brings his own machete. So he's like, I see that you've got one, but I've got one too, and we can settle this like.
Yes. Well,
Right.
notice I did say we went there once,
That's
because every
right.
time that I've suggested that we go back again, I definitely get outvoted by my kids and my wife, who think I'm mad. But there you go. So you were going to say that there were some other things around this whole area of fear and marketing. And the
Yes.
other one that I wanted to run past you, why in the hell do we like horror films? Now, I have to
Yeah.
say,
Okay. So
I don't like horror films because
I don't really
they scare
either.
me.
I'm not a huge fan. There are a couple that I've enjoyed, but as a genre, it's not my
Yeah.
thing. But I have a daughter who loves them. She
Yeah.
loves these horror. She listens to these horror podcasts, like
Wow.
so she can even
What, like The
anyway.
Intuitive Customer?
Yes,
Because
it's
that's
mostly
pretty
listening to
horrible.
her dad talk to this terrifying British guy. She's afraid of both of us, and who can blame her?
Just
Um,
tell her, mate. Just tell her. I've got this really great mask.
Guy Fawkes is not scary. I don't know if you know the history. Um, yeah, so I think that's a slightly separate issue.
Right.
Like why is fear motivating? Why is it persuasive? And then why do we seek out fear sometimes? I think the reason that we seek out fear sometimes in the form of horror movies, but also like roller coasters and
Yeah.
haunted houses and like
Yeah.
skydiving, it is such a powerful emotion
Right.
that part of that can be appealing, like that we
Yeah.
can feel it, but we tend to prefer it in these like uh, safe spaces, right? So, like
Sure.
you were saying, Universal Studios isn't in fact trying to kill you. The guy with the
Sure.
chainsaw, it doesn't actually have a chain on it. It's just the
Sure.
loud motor. Like there's no
Sure.
spinning blade.
Not
Um,
according to my wife. Let me
yeah.
tell you that.
Well, that's yeah. Well, then she was right because Rainey's always right. All right, so and going on a roller coaster, it's very scary, but we know that it's ultimately safe.
Sure.
Um, I remember I saw a documentary about some thrill seeker guy who wanted to like go into a war zone, and so he was like talking how tough he was, and he was all excited, and he went just as like a tourist to Afghanistan during the heat of the fighting,
Well,
and they they had this footage of this guy just like curled up in a ball sobbing because this was not a safe way to experience fear.
no. Sure.
And so like I do think there's that like where there's some excitement and some adrenaline and some benefit to
Mm,
it when it's within a safe sphere. So,
yeah. It's interesting actually. Now you're saying that because it's when you watch films, you do get into them, don't you? You
Yeah,
know, you feel that you are Superman, or you
yeah,
feel that you are in that war, and you know, you even sit there and go, "Well, I'd do this at that point," and you think to yourself, "No, I probably wouldn't. I'd
no,
probably be
no.
running too fast."
I remember watching Silence of the Lambs and
Yeah,
then having to walk from my friend's apartment to my car alone afterwards, and
sure.
walking faster than I strictly needed to. Because yeah, you do. You become invested in that. But
Yeah,
again, it's within kind of this safe sphere. So, and I think that people, so I don't know that people seek out like public health messaging,
sure,
anti-smoking messaging. So I don't think people
sure,
seek out that kind of fear.
sure,
But it is all part of this idea that fear is just such a strong emotion.
sure.
So
So
there's one
what?
more element of
Yeah, go
this,
on.
of kind of the theory of fear appeals. So we've talked about how it's very motivational. We've talked about how it overlaps with loss aversion.
Yeah,
If you want a fear appeal to work, then the final part of it is that you need to be providing the solution to that fear, right? So
right,
if you're Tylenol, we're going to make you afraid of having stomach issues, but then our product is the solution to that, right? If you're a
right,
political candidate, we want you to be afraid of voting for the other guy and what his or her policies are going to be. But the solution is to vote for our candidate, right? So
sure,
that's the kind of the resolution of it, is there needs to be some efficacy around the solution
sure.
to resolve the fear.
And I guess there must be some belief that the solution would be true as well,
Yeah,
or
yeah. So if
that
you make me afraid and say that your candidate is the solution, but I don't believe your candidate knows what they're talking about, then
sure,
that's not going to work. It's not going to resolve
sure,
the fear.
sure. So what? Where does the things like? Because again, I was thinking of different examples. If you think about alarm systems for your house,
Yeah.
that's based around fear, isn't it?
Yep.
If you think about, I was thinking about gun sales.
Yep.
You know, guns are all based around the fact. I mean, as you know, we don't have many guns in England whatsoever. It always amazes me how many people
Yeah.
buy a
Thanks a
gun in the
lot, Guy
States.
Fawkes.
Yes, 1605. I looked it up
That's
before
right.
we did this podcast. 1605. And for those of you that don't know, Guy Fawkes was part of the English Catholics who decided that he was going to blow up Parliament. So Parliament was sitting, and he sat underneath it with a load of. I was just about to say dynamite. It wasn't dynamite those
Probably
days. It
predated
was
dynamite, didn't it?
no, yeah, absolutely. It was gunpowder.
Hmm.
So on November the 5th, which is the day he was executed, I think, or it happened, I can't remember. We have what's called Guy Fawkes Night, which is where we burn an effigy of Guy Fawkes on a bonfire, which is interesting as well. All these things
England's a
that you do through
weird
tradition.
place.
It
I don't
is,
know if I told you
yeah.
that before, Colin.
When I was a kid, we used to put this effigy on the bonfire, and then put bangers in the heads and arms, and then watch them explode. But did you know? Have you ever heard of being hung, drawn, and quartered?
Sure.
Right, there you
I'm a
go.
civilized guy.
Yeah. So he was hung, drawn, and quartered. And for those of you that don't know what that was he was
You'll
hung
be
until he
glad we
was.
have a video podcast now. Colin, I think you've got an animation that you want to
Yeah,
show everybody.
I'm gonna demonstrate this. Yeah. No, he
Yeah,
was hung
speaking of
until he.
fear appeals.
Yes, well, I guess that was part of it, wasn't it? Because if you were
Yeah.
a traitor, then you were hung, drawn, and quartered.
I mean,
So
that's a great example,
it
actually. Like
is.
if we want
It
if
is
we
a
want
very
to
good example.
persuade you
Yeah.
to not rebel against the government,
No.
we want to make you as afraid as possible of,
Yes.
the
Yes.
consequences of that action.
Well,
Yeah,
actually, they demonstrated it in Braveheart. Did you ever see that film
that's
with
right.
Mel
Yep.
Gibson? So you're hung, drawn, and quartered is you are hung until you nearly die. You are then cut in four whilst you're alive, and your intestines are put onto a burning tray whilst you're alive. So really, I, can
All
you imagine being they're sat around a table, okay,
right.
and they're going, right, what could we do? I know we could. What about hanging, drawing, and quartering them? No, I've got a better idea than that. What about if we? Can you imagine what's the decision-making process to come up with hanging drawing, and quartering somebody?
I
I mean, can you?
assume they had a committee meeting and there were three guys there who each had very strong opinions about hanging or
Or
drawing or
drawing?
quartering,
Yeah,
and they just couldn't resolve it. So finally the
no,
king said, well, let's just do all three.
yeah,
I assume that was it.
yeah. Or
I
they
tell you
put
one thing,
because
Colin, our listeners are very excited for next year's Halloween episode because they want to know where we're going to go from here.
yes. You can imagine the CEO turning around and saying, if we don't improve our customer experience this year, we're going to hang, draw, and quarter people. That would be quite motivational.
It would be
But,
very motivational, but it would
but
also, and this is where I want us to go next, is
right.
what are the risks of pursuing that strategy for
Do
the
you believe
CEO?
that they would do it?
Aside from, the small matter of murder charges being leveled. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So if it's all right, like maybe we can end by talking about like these fear appeals can be very, very effective.
Yeah.
I think the reason that they continue to be used in politics, despite some evidence of the fact that like people generally are less enthusiastic about politics in general, the more of these fear appeals there are. But
Yeah.
we keep seeing them because they're very, very effective.
And they
Uh,
work.
but despite that, there are some risks associated with it. So we're not
Yeah.
we're not telling you that you should definitely use fear appeals in your
No.
marketing.
No.
So
No.
one is that they tend to produce strong negative emotions. Fear, as we've mentioned, is an emotion. It's very powerful and it tends to be very negative.
Yeah.
Puts people in a bad mood, and so there's that risk that that blows back on your brand. And so by making, especially if we use more extreme fear, right? If we make you a little bit afraid of stomach pain, that's less risky in terms of this negative emotional reaction. If we make you afraid of death, that's a big, big deal. Um,
Yes. Yeah. No. And therefore, I guess this is the reason why there are not massive amounts of adverts that have fear as the theme that runs through them.
yeah,
Although it is obviously a big motivational thing, but I think
yeah,
for me it's more of I would call it more of an implied fear. It's a bit like guns or house alarms or whatever else. They're implying if you don't do this, then bad things are going to happen to you, basically.
yeah, for sure. I mean, and a lot of it is that they do try to resolve the fear too. So like if you
Yes,
get this home security system, then you won't have
yes,
to be
yes,
afraid of it anymore.
yes. That's
But
right.
the fact is, we're still kind of playing with fire a little bit. The
Yes.
fears
No, I
a
agree.
strong negative
I agree.
emotion.
Yeah. Good.
There's also the risk of reactance. So anytime you persuade people, this is a risk. But especially with fear appeals, which tend to be a little heavy-handed, people don't like feeling like they're being manipulated. And
Right.
so if you come on strong with a fear appeal, there's the risk that people will just reject you and your message because they don't like how hard you're pushing. And so they'll,
Sure.
they'll actually move in a different direction. I do
Sure.
think that some of the anti-smoking campaigns blow up this way,
Sure.
where if they push too hard, then the message,
Sure.
particularly for teenagers, is that, oh, this is dangerous and cool,
Mm.
and so they react to that in that way.
And
And then,
thinking about
go
it,
ahead.
you can't. I can't think of a brand whose major appeal is fear, or whose major. No, I wouldn't even say appeal because you wouldn't be appealing for, but whose main emotion that
Positioning.
they are trying to evoke positioning is based around fear.
I mean, I think we could think of like home security is a good example. Like I think that there are some home security brands where the primary appeal is fear based, just because of the product category. Like if I feel perfectly
But
safe,
would you say that about insurance? Because insurance is to a certain extent based upon that, isn't it? So
yeah,
the fear of, and this is where you get back to the loss aversion, the fear of losing something, and that loss of something. And this is where I always go back to everything. Nothing's ever black and white. It's degrees, basically shades of grey, because it is based around that as well, isn't it? So
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I think certain attribute positioning, like Volvo for decades was positioned as the safest car.
yeah,
I think it's hard to position yourself around safety as an attribute without there being fear appeals
no, and that's
involved
what
in
I
it.
mean by the word implied.
Yeah,
They're not
yeah.
actually turning around and saying drive our car because you will get, the chances of you getting killed are less than driving this car. But by saying the word safety and positioning it around that, you know what they're really saying.
I mean, it can also be. I agree there. I think that usually there's a light touch, but I
Sure.
remember Volvo ads when I was growing up. I show some of these in class where the ad is just showing the car getting smashed to
Yeah.
pieces over and over, and
Yeah, because
so
they
they
used to use those crash dummies, didn't
that's
they?
right.
Yeah.
Or they also would have like testimonial ads where it would just be people who are saying, I believe Volvo saved my life. Like I was in this
Sure.
terrible car accident with my
Yeah.
kids and we walked away. So
Sure.
I still
Sure.
think those might be fear pills.
Yeah. 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 No, you may be
But
right. At least they're not coming at you with chainsaws.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So the last danger that we need to worry about is dissonance reduction. So fear, especially when it's imposed on us by others, can be very unpleasant. And so people will sometimes do what they need to get away from that unpleasantness. And a lot of times that involves psychologically disengaging. So we do things like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. Like, a lot of the anti-smoking campaigns, young people will say, oh, that's an old
Sure.
person problem. Like, I'm
Sure.
a very different person than the people that affect. And that can reduce the effectiveness of these messages as well.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Great. Good. Okay. So any last pearls of wisdom on practicalities of this? I mean, for me, the practicalities of it are not to stay away from it, but I can't think the average customer experience to be based around fear doesn't sound like a good idea.
I think
But I
for
guess there's horses for courses.
For practical advice, I would lean into what you were kind of pushing back on, which is it's possible to use fear appeals while having a very light touch around
Yes,
it. Like,
sure.
coming out and shaking people by the shoulders and screaming at them that they're going to die unless they use your product, probably not great. But
Yes,
there are lots of things that people don't like, and so making them aware of those things, and then immediately presenting your product experience solution as the solution to that, I think can be effective.
yeah, good. Okay, well, let me do this again. How about that? We
I
wish
mean,
you a.
it improves your looks for sure.
It does. It does. I've got the mask on to the people listening on audio. If you, we hope you have a great Halloween, and we look forward to talking to you next week if you're still alive.
Very nice.
All right. Cheers, everyone.